Well, how are you guys doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, good, thanks.
I'm doing good.
Let me see. I think this is the chat I'm looking at. Okay, so welcome here, guys. There's no real format planned for this, and this isn't a lecture or anything. This is just for us to hang out and discuss things. We can talk about whatever you want to. So I hope you guys have some stuff you'd like to talk about. And first of all, happy Halloween. You guys are all wearing your costumes, aren't you?
Well, you might consider that. I just woke up. It's 11 o'clock in Texas, and I look pretty scary right now.
Let's see. I got my daughter AJ sitting over here, and she's sitting here in her dragon mask, or she got a dragon costume, so she's wearing this. Say hi. She sounds a little bit like Bane through that thing.
Hi, AJ.
And my wife's over here trying to stay out of the way. Say hi, Carrie. Well, I'm glad we're here. I'm glad I got this. I'm glad I got this set up for today because we weren't able to get a video out last month, and then this month was just kind of hell on earth. So we got struck by lightning. The house itself didn't get struck, but it struck really nearby, and it knocked our router out. So we were down for about a week. So we've been scrambling to get caught back up, and I didn't want to leave you guys with nothing 2 months in a row. That's just terrible. So I'm glad you guys are here. And it's good to hear your voices. I know Billy's voice, but I don't think I've heard the rest of you guys before, so this is kind of cool.
Yeah, that's true. Very nice to be here. First time.
Let's see. Yeah, and hopefully this will just be the first time. If this goes well, we'll do this periodically. It'll be a good way for me to get something for you guys to participate in, since you're such wonderful patrons, and especially on months when I'm having a hard time finding a good video to put together. So, what would you guys like to talk about today? I bet you want to talk about magic somehow. Everybody's being quiet.
That sounds like a good topic.
I don't want to say. I don't want to say anything.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I didn't come with anything prepared, but I'm quite excited for pretty much whatever you end up speaking about. And maybe I'll come up with some additional questions during what everyone else contributes.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll come up with subjects to talk about. Well, all right. Hey, Billy, are you there?
Yes, I am. How are you?
Oh, there he is. Okay. Just
Yes.
making sure.
Do I sound like a Muppet?
No, you don't sound like a Muppet. I think I sound more like a Muppet than you do. So let me see. Are all you guys also in my class, or are you just? I think Billy's taking Solomonic 101. I'm pretty sure
Yes.
Gaddy is as well. Did I say that right? Is it Gaddy?
Yeah, I mean, it varies by country, but the correct way is actually a Gadi. But yeah, a lot of people do call me Gadi as well, and especially in America. I'm not in Solomonic. I've been what's the word? Like lurking in Abramelin. I haven't done the rites, but I've been in the group.
Okay, well that's fine. I mean, that's not going to start until next Passover anyway. I mean, the class is there, but the rite doesn't start until. Actually, I get a lot of people who come in there with the intention of doing the rite like a year or even several years later, but they just want to get in there to study the material.
Yeah, I think it'll be great when I do it to be prepared.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much about that rite people don't understand. There's so many little subtle things hidden in the book that if you don't know the history and you don't know the context, you can miss them. So that's why I offer that. So yeah, it's great that you're in there, even if you're not, doing it right now, or even if you don't do it next year.
Thank you. Great to be there.
Awesome.
I was wondering more about the age constraint on the Abramelin.
Uh-huh. Just in general, or it had
Yeah,
specific question?
like I said, yeah, in general, I'm 50. I'm 52 now, and I was about that.
I think I've got one student that I know of who I think is actually a bit older than you are. Yeah, the thing with the age constraints is, and I do talk about this in the class, that it's kind of more of a general rule rather than a hard and fast. I want to say it's more of a suggestion than it is a hard and fast rule. Basically, because it says, I believe it's, you shouldn't be less than 25, I think, and you shouldn't be over, I'm going to say 50. I'm pulling all this off the top of my head or from somewhere else. But what he's basically saying in that is, you don't want to be so young that you're not settled yet in your life yet. You know, when you're in your early 20s, especially, you tend to be moving around a lot. You don't know what you really believe yet. You know, so they don't want you. He doesn't want you to get involved in something. So, I mean, because Abramelin is a tradition that you're going to follow for the rest of your life, it's really not good to ask someone that young to make that kind of commitment and decision, because they're a lot more likely to end up having to break off the operation because they've got to move, or maybe they're in school, you know, starting new relationships. Your whole life is beginning. So Abraham really wanted you to be at least somewhat past that before making the kind of leap that Abramelin calls for. And then on the other side, he didn't want you to be so old that you were just completely set in your ways and unable to change. So, you know, with that in mind, I mean, when I did it, I think I did it 2 years early. I think I was 23. And like I said, there are people that have gone in later years, as long as they're open to the changes that it can bring. Because God knows, when I did Abramelin, I mean, as soon as my angel woke up, it was like dropping a nuclear bomb in my life. You know, I suddenly, you know, I started Abramelin in an apartment. Carrie and I were together at that point. And after Abramelin, within, I would say, maybe 2 or 3 months after the rite completed, I was laying on a friend's couch. Carrie and I had broken up. I think we broke up for about 6 months. And I was sick as a dog and had no idea where I was going to end up or what my life was going to be after that. So it can be very shocking. So, I mean, as long as you are willing to, you understand that it is a very life-changing ordeal that you're going to go through. And if you're ready for that, I don't think that you have to worry, you know, too much about being over 50. So that's kind of my answer on that. It's something you'll have to kind of make up your own mind about. But just be aware that it can be very taxing. It can really send your life in a whole different direction.
Aaron, how did it send? What was the biggest change in your life that you experienced when you took the rite and after the rite and as you progressed along?
Jeez, I mean, there's no way to even narrow that one down, to be honest with you. Everything changed. I was an entirely different person before this.
Oh, goodness.
And that's really kind of the point of Abramelin. It's the point of the long isolation, because what Abraham wants you to do is break all of your old patterns. You have to change your diet. You have to stop going out and socializing. You know, everything. You just shut everything. It's almost like a little mini lockdown. You know, it's like a little mini 2020. And well, unless you do the 18-month, then it's even longer than a year. So you break all of that's the whole idea, is breaking every pattern you've ever established in your life and focusing instead entirely on just appealing to the highest. And so yeah, when I came out, like I said, you know, I had a job, which was really my first real job. I mean, the first job that I really held for a long time. And I was with Carrie. I had an apartment. And then the next thing I know, that apartment's gone. My relationship broke down. I got sick as a dog. I mean, physically ill at that point, which I don't get sick very easily. And there I was, laying on my friend's couch with no life, no prospects for the future. I had no idea what was coming. But as my guardian angel, kind of took over the reins, then things started happening. You know, I of course did reestablish. I didn't lose my job. I actually thought I was going to end up losing my job. There were several days when I just couldn't even get up to go to work, but I kept the job for a few more years and got myself reestablished as far as, you know, a place to live. Even Carrie and I got back together eventually. And I was really introduced to a whole world that I had just not been a part of before, if that makes sense. I started, that's when I started writing. The very first,
Yeah.
the very first essays I ever published were in that period. In fact, I was living in my friend's house when I got my very first articles published. And it just continued to build from there. You know, I wrote more and more. I ended up getting cold contacted by Llewellyn to write books for them. My guardian angel said, hey, you know, the Ciceros, Chicken Tabitha Cicero, they live 2 hours from you in Florida. You need to go meet them. And so I said, yes, ma'am. And I did what she said, and I went and met them. So that pretty much, that launched my Golden Dawn career. And so, so basically it was just one thing after another, where what Crowley would call your true will, that began to really coalesce for me, what my purpose in life was. And before that, I had no purpose. I mean, at all. I mean, I was, you know, I lived in, you know, what we called Roach Motel apartments, and I didn't have very good jobs, and I didn't have anything for my future, any hopes or plans or dreams. I was just a kind of a broken person, you know, broken, abused kid, really. So it just wiped everything clean and set me on a whole new path, and really set me in the path of my true will, of my destiny. And everything has just built one thing after the other from there. So yeah, it can really change everything. And that goes back to that age thing. You know, that's why Abraham didn't want you to be too old and established. I don't mean old as an elderly, but I mean established in your life to the point where if your life goes nuclear, if your guardian angel says, all right, all of this has to go because all of this is holding you back, then if you're 50, how are you going to start over again? You know, how are you going to rebuild everything? Because that's what I had to do. Luckily, I was in my mid-20s, so I had to rebuild my life from there, because my first start in life was just a complete waste. So yeah, everything changed. I mean, even psychologically, you know, I had all sorts of psychological hang-ups, you know, agoraphobia, what they call social stress anxiety now. I had that, and I had all sorts of, you know, OCD issues, and like, I was just very messed up. And she took me on this path of learning and to self-discovery, and well, in the Golden Dawn, what we call spiritual alchemy, you know, it just melted me down and restructured me from the ground up. I don't know, have any of you guys ever read any of Robert Anton Wilson's work?
Yes.
No, I haven't. I've not heard of him.
Robert Anton Wilson, he wrote a book called Prometheus Rising. What was that?
Yeah, I said I read a bit of, didn't he also do Sex, Drugs, and Magic?
Yes, but was it called Sex, Drugs, and Magic, or was it just called Sex and Drugs? I forget. I think I've got that book somewhere. But the two that I think that one influenced me a bit, but the main one that influenced me was Prometheus Rising, and then he kind of wrote a sequel to it called Ishtar Rising. And I tell you what, I cannot recommend those books highly enough. That, especially Prometheus Rising, is like an operator's manual for your brain. And he talks about psychological.
So is that the one where he goes through the biocircuits and everything?
Exactly. And he talks about imprint vulnerability on these different circuits. So for those of you unfamiliar, basically he's working on a psychological model that Timothy Leary created. And it basically says that when you're first born, that is your most primitive psychological circuit. And the only thing you know as a baby, and this is called first circuit consciousness, the only thing you know as an infant is the fight or flight reflex. Of course, there's no fight for an infant, but it's either moving toward what is warm and nurturing, you know, mom's arms, mom's breast, what makes you feel comfortable and safe, or moving away from what is noxious and terrifying and scary. And you take imprints there, and then as you get as you start to stand up and walk around for the first time, that's what's called the second circuit of imprint vulnerability. So you, this is like, especially if you have siblings, as a toddler, you start learning, okay, my big brother is big enough to push me down when he gets mad at me. So I have to approach my big brother in a certain way so I don't get beat up. And then, of course, you may have younger siblings too, who they're littler than you, and you learn you can push them down. So this is where we get that first, especially as apes, you know, we get that hierarchy concept in our mind. And so whereas the first circuit, think of it as a cross. The first circuit is forward and back, and the second circuit is hierarchy, up and down. And there's a lot of psychological models that will put you, they'll make that into a graph, and you can actually be placed on different, like for instance, people who are very liberal and progressive in their political views tend to be on that graph closer to the nurturing side and somewhere in the middle between the hierarchy side, you know. You're not overly dominant, you're not overly submissive. But then people who are very much on the radical right, your Trump supporter types, the people who really love toxic masculinity, they are like way over on the noxious side and way high on the dominant side. They want to be the alpha male, the big guy who pushes everyone down. They don't care how you feel, and they don't want to help you when you need help. So that's kind of a basic graph. And the reason I was going into all that is because that was my experience. Was my guardian angel took me all the way back to the first circuit and started re-imprinting me one little bit at a time. So yeah, my guardian angel just in every way took me all the way back to the first circuit and re-imprinted me all the way back up to the fourth and fifth circuits. And so that's the kind of thing you can expect to happen with the Abramelin operation. It's personal mind washing. It's basically brainwashing, but you are doing it to yourself, and you're being guided by this guardian angel who actually does care about you and wants you to grow and become a strong, self-sufficient person. So yeah, there's a lot of danger in that. You hear people talk about how dangerous Abramelin is, and that's why. People who go into it thinking that it's just a lark or just so they can tell their friends they did it, and it can really mess you up because it can just shatter your entire psychological structure.
Hi, can I ask a question? Can you guys hear me? Because my sound keeps going in and out, so I can kind of hear you every so often, but hopefully you can hear me. I also wanted to ask about Abramelin, and just I've always had an attraction to it ever since I was about 15 or 16, and I read something and didn't really know what it was, and it's kind of continued to be there, just floating around in my consciousness, I suppose. And I've read a lot of books, haven't done any of your courses yet, but I will do. I'm 40 now, and I just wanted to kind of ask about, I think one of the main barriers for me would be kind of responsibilities. We don't have any small children, but for my husband, have you got any ideas on not just how you would prepare? Because obviously for me, I'm thinking it would take a few years to even get into the space of knowing whether I would want to or not. But how do you prepare a spouse for it, particularly if there's somebody that is very, very sensitive to energy anyway? One of the barriers for me would be my husband, not just with his physical health, but has also had some kind of mental health stuff recently. So that would, for me, has been a reason why not to. Could you just say anything about that?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. That last bit there about having the psychological issues can be a problem. Because I can tell you this. Okay, there's kind of two prongs to this that I want to cover. On the one hand, people do have this idea that Abramelin means that you have to go live in a cave by yourself for 6 to 18 months. But that's really not the case. Even in the text, it says that you can have your wife or even children. You can be around your family. You're just not supposed to go out and socialize. You're not supposed to go to parties and restaurants and bars and that kind of thing. So don't have any worries that because you have a spouse, or even if you have a family with children and everything else, that's not a barrier to the operation. So that's fine. But on the other side, that other prong is that one thing I saw, because Carrie was with me when I did it, and in many ways she went through the right too. Now, she didn't, do the final 7 days. She doesn't have her guardian angel put to her head, but she still, she had to change her diet. She had to change her life in order to accommodate me going through it. She went out with me to gather the river sand to put on the terrace. Just every little thing, she helped me sew the robe. So in many ways, she also went through the operation, and it also disrupted her life habits, and it brought big changes for her. So I almost want to say that you need to kind of consider what your spouse is going through, what those psychological issues are, because it could kind of depend. But just keep in mind that you going through the right with them there will have an effect on them, at least to some degree. If you're dealing with someone who has stuff like I did with like agoraphobia and OCD issues, I couldn't see the right necessarily being so detrimental. It could even be helpful to them. On the other hand, if they're having serious like schizophrenia issues, delusion issues, those kinds of imbalances, I would be very careful about putting them through that. But at least in the end, they're not going to go into the oratory with you. And so that's where things can get really, really heinous. Oh, and also keep in mind, like I've been saying, it's going to affect you to such a degree that your whole life could blow up. And if they're part of your life, like for instance, Carrie and I broke up, and I kind of pinged off on my own. And it was almost kind of providence because, Carrie and I got together so young, we were still college age, and she was still living at home, and she literally had to slip out in the middle of the night to come move in with me because her grandparents didn't know if they liked this dude that Carrie was hanging out with, and into all this weird stuff and everything. And suddenly, like I said, with us breaking up, and we moved out of the apartment, and she ended up going back home. And the reason I said it was kind of providence was because that was exactly when her grandparents, one right after the other, got very sick. And she needed to be there to help take care of them. And going through that with them was also a very life-altering experience for her as well. So my life going nuclear was also her life going nuclear. So I would be aware of it, but depending, just really depending on what your partner is facing. Again, we were very young. We were able to kind of let things go nuclear and then start over. But, it sure didn't make it fun, no. But it was very necessary. What both of us went through was necessary for us. And it could be that way for you as well. But, again, not knowing details, I don't want to just say, oh, no, sure, go do it. No, don't worry about it, So take things into consideration, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I almost wish my student, Patrick, I'm kind of surprised he's not here, but he's one of the he was the guy I was mentioned before that was, I think he's like in his 60s. And I would love to have him chime in on this, on what happened with him and his wife, because, he went through all of this, and I know it did affect his wife, but his life didn't go completely nuclear afterward either. So, it really depends on your personal situation and what your guardian angel is going to put you through after everything is said and done. Yeah, that's a good question, Polly. Is he practicing magic at all, or is it just you?
He's a lot more plugged into the mains than I am. He's one of these people that, I'll be at home reading about magic, and he'll be off having magical experiences and bumping into strange people, and he's just constantly he's very kind of, there is stuff that we do together, but he's very unstructured, so it's kind of like the things that we do and the practices that we do together are very much because I have suggested it and he's been up for it, really. So
I
he's
got
very
you.
sympathetic, but he's not somebody that sits down and reads a lot of books. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, it's totally possible. It's totally possible. Yeah, I guess that I would probably have to just start the process of I guess educating him about what it is, and maybe letting him make a decision later on.
I would say so, but I do think it would be very beneficial, given that he is also prone to these experiences.
It's, a lot of the things that you've said about your upbringing chime very true for him.
Yeah, yeah. I think him being involved in magic would be better than if he weren't. But that does mean that, you know, it'll probably hit him pretty hard. But in his situation, I mean, it would probably be even more beneficial to him if he actually performed the rite himself. Because, you know, like I said, no matter what, at the end of that 6 months, it's only going to be you that goes into that oratory and puts your head at that altar. And that's where the real difference is going to be made.
Yeah.
Now, I can tell you in Carrie's case, of course, she uses magic too, and was at the time too. And it actually kind of it resulted in her gaining contact with her guardian angel. Because here I was having all of these angelic experiences with my guardian angel and being directed to go here and do that. And she, you know, while she doesn't have her guardian angel put to her head like I do, she actually started having dreams where her guardian angel would come to her in different forms and talk to her. So she didn't get knowledge and conversation of her guardian angel, but she did end up with conversation with her guardian angel. So yeah, I would just talk to him about it. I think you said it perfectly. Educate him on what it is, what it means, what it involves, and if he's willing to go through it with you. And of course, you can't share an oratory. You can't do the rite together. I mean, even if you did it at the same time, you'd have to have separate oratories. But he will be affected by it, and it could be beneficial. It could be beneficial, but it's not going to be fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Don't ever think any of this is going to be fun.
I've had no, I've had my life blow up because of magic before. Don't worry.
Okay,
Very,
so
very
a little bit of
careful
what I'm
these
talking
days.
about. Yeah. It is any initiation you go through, because we went through a lot of stuff in the Golden Dawn too as we worked our way up the Tree of Life, and that, yeah, they'll tear you apart. But that's the whole thing. If you look back in the old days, and that's what, especially with Abramelin, it's old shamanism dealing with, and those, you know, the pattern is your demons tear you apart, and what the universe wants to see is once they tear you to pieces, can you drag yourself back together? And if you can't, then they decide you're not worth their time, and they move on, and they leave you there in a heap. And you kind of like Firuza Balk at the end of the craft, you know, in a rubber room. But if you can pull yourself back together, that's what they want. That's how you gain. You guys see me talk about it online every once in a while, spiritual authority. And that's how you get that, is you are able to put yourself back together again. And then they go, oh, okay, maybe this isn't just another ape that's going to pester us for free money and sex. You know, that this is someone that we might actually want to hang with, and who might be worthy to hang out with us. And that's when you gain that authority. And so, yeah, it's all very involved and unpleasant process. And anyone you ever hear, and you'll see this online so much, oh, I did Abramelin, and it was just the most beautiful, profound thing I ever did. Let me tell you, that person is lying. Nobody who has gone through Abramelin will ever describe it that way. It is long, monotonous, boring, and when about 2/3 of the way through is when it really starts breaking down your psychological structure, and that's when the universe starts throwing all sorts of crap at you, and that you have to deal with, and, you know, unfinished business from your childhood you've got to face now and get over. Again, the demons. Those demons that you have to conjure in the final days, they're going to surround you, and just like the old shaman, they're going to do everything they can to tear you apart, and then you've got to put yourself back together. So it's not fun.
I was wondering about the nature of the the guardian angel that you said that it was like a Christos energy?
Yeah, it took me a long time. I should say it took her a long time to guide me to my understanding on that. But what a lot of people don't understand about Abramelin is that it is essentially a Gnostic text. It was written by a Jewish person, but Abramelin, in as much as he really existed, he may just be a construct, but at least as Abraham wrote him, he lived out in the deserts, literally just a few miles down the road from Nag Hammadi. So, we're talking about one of those old Gnostic hermits that lived out in the deserts. And once you understand the Gnostic symbolism that is kind of encoded into Abramelin, you'll start seeing where Abraham is telling you that this is not a standard angel. This is not an angel from any of the choirs of the seven heavens. It's not from any of the spheres of the tree of life. It doesn't answer to any archangel. The guardian angel is an eon, which I don't know if you guys are very familiar with Gnosticism, but the way the Gnostics saw it, they were Platonists, and they felt that there were the three worlds in the natural world: the celestial world, the physical world, and the underworld. And that's basically your standard model through most magic and occultism through history. But because they were Platonists, they also understood this archetypal world, and they called it the pleroma. And the pleroma was just pure spiritual. There was no physicality there. And all of the beings that lived up there was what they called eons, kind of like super archangels in a way. And the Great Mother Sophia was an eon. And you can find it in Valentinian Gnostic texts, but they have writings about marriage to these eons, to these higher angels. And there's one tale in there that when I discovered this writing, this Valentinian text, my guardian angel pointed at it and said, this is what I am. And what it was a tale that when Sophia, the whole story is that Sophia wanted to engender a child with her mate. Everything in the pleroma is balanced. So all of these eons, and the eons are basically the thoughts of God. And as God was having these thoughts, they were coming out in pairs. And Sophia her and her mate were the last pair of thoughts, the last eons to manifest. And she wanted to continue the process, just like all the eons, the next pair and then the next pair, what they call emanation. She wanted to continue the process, but her mate felt that they were so far from the source that things were going to start breaking down, that they would have imperfect children. So he refused. So she went off and did it on her own. She created a child of her own, and that is what they call the demiurge, the creator. But because she had him on her own without the involvement of her balanced mate, he was blind and mad, and she basically hid him in the darkness that was far, far away from the source. And then she just sat there and cried. The Gnostics believe that all the passions that we as humans feel came from that moment. We get our joy from her joy at having a child. We get her fear from her suddenly finding herself lost in the darkness. We get our loneliness from her being separated from her mate. We get shame from her being ashamed of the deformed child that she had produced. I mean, everything that we feel came from this incident with the Great Mother. And she cried. And the Christos, or who at that time was the Logos, and the Logos heard her. The Logos means word. So when you're reading the Bible and it says the word of God, that's the Logos. And the Logos came to her and tried to fix what was wrong. So he's the one who created the great barrier that separated the darkness from the pleroma, from the light. And the Valentinians complicate the story because they didn't want to suggest that the Christos, that Christ, had sex with Sophia. So they kind of fudged it by breaking the Christos down into several entities. So the Christos came with his entourage, and they say that Sophia fell in love with these angels that Christ had come with. but in reality, that this is all one being. So basically, she fell in love with Christ, and they mated, and they had children. But these, of course, were balanced children, because now she had a balanced mate, and she gave birth to these eons, these archangelic beings, and those are the guardian angels. So they are all eons, and they are all the direct children of Christ and Sophia, the mother and the father, the alchemical king and queen. So they are essentially the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit is the child of the mother and father. So when you call down the guardian angel, you are literally getting the Holy Spirit itself. It's just your own personalized spark of that Holy Spirit. So yeah, this isn't an archangel that answers to Michael or Gabriel or Raphael or any of those guys. These come from the highest of the highest realm, and they are not connected to any star. That's why Abramelin is so anti-astrology. If you read the book, especially the German original, he wasn't anti-astrology. He says that astrology does have its place when you're dealing with things here in this world, but the guardian angel has nothing to do with astrology, because they're not connected to any star or any planet. So you're dealing with a very powerful and very lofty force when you're calling this angel down. And it saddens me, and you guys seem to get really grumpy online when people start pontificating on what they think the guardian angel is, and they clearly do not understand what I just described to you, that this is the Holy Spirit. This is Spiritus Sanctus. This is the Logos. This is Sophia. This is Metatron. This is, the highest of the high, and that you're bringing down into your life. And that's also why it can be so dangerous, because they're not connected to the physical. They don't understand at all your need for money or food or a home to live in, So they'll come down and they'll disrupt everything in your life in order to get you on the path that you need to be on. So that's the nature of the quote-unquote angel that you're dealing with. And I probably just confused the matter a lot more, didn't I?
I don't think so. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Are there ever any conflicts between the holy guardian angel and what you might be doing Solomonically with the zodiacal angels?
Not at all. I've never had a conflict. As long as you understand the difference between them, there's no conflict at all, because once you put this is another important thing you got to remember. Once the angel is put to your head, you have an entity who, as I said, has no understanding of the physical world at all, and now they too have found themselves reborn into a physical body for the very first time. So even they are getting this sensory overload that they've never had before. And they can kind of freak out a little bit. That's part of kind of what goes nuclear in your life, all this sensation, all this experience. I don't know, have any of you guys ever seen the movie Michael with John Travolta?
No, I haven't seen that one.
Yes.
Yeah.
I loved that movie.
Yeah, when I first heard about it, I'm like, John Travolta playing an archangel, give me a friggin' break. But I tell you what, I highly recommend that movie now, because that was my experience. Michael, in that movie, Michael came down and took on a physical form, and I mean, he just couldn't get enough. He couldn't get enough of the sex, of the sugar, of engaging in battle, of just everything. He was like a child almost, just wanting, and he also knew he had a limited time in the movie, so he was just trying to eat up everything he could and wring the most out of life. And my guardian angel was really like that at first. She was just all over the place, wanting to experience. But in time, that kind of dies down a little, and they do get used to living here a lot more. And once they can calm down, and once they get oriented and get their quote unquote feet under them, that's when the real work begins, when they can really start directing you and guiding you. And the way that relates to my Solomonic work is, it wasn't conflicting with, your guardian angel is not going to, or at least shouldn't, in my opinion, is not going to tell you to go live in the desert and be ascetic the way the old hermits and the old Sethian Gnostics were. they're going to want you to live in the world, and they're going to want you to interface with the world. And in order to do that, yeah, you know, especially from a magical standpoint, you're going to need to meet and start working with these archangels and spirits. And in fact, that's why in the final 7 days, that's why you turn and call the chiefs of hell, because all of those spirits, you know, that biblically speaking are associated with hell. They are the spirits of nature. They are the embodied forces of the zodiacal forces. That's why there's 12 chiefs. So it is intended from the very beginning, it is intended that you will interface with and face and I hate to say gain control of. I mean, you know, it's like the old rub of the king who his advisors thought he was a god and he could command the forces of nature. So he actually took them out to the beach and stood there on the beach as the tide came in and commanded the tide back in his deepest, most commanding voice, and the tide rolled in anyway. And so he had to tell them that, you know, I don't command the forces of nature, but I've learned to work with them. I've learned to make them benefit me rather than be subject to them. And that's what you're doing in Abramelin. And whether it's those 12 princes and all of their subservient spirits, or whether you're talking about the angels and the archangels, that's what your guardian angel wants you to do, is to face and no longer be subservient to those forces, but learn how to work with them and become better for it and make them better for working with you. So my guardian angel is the one who taught me most of everything I know about working with the angels in the Solomonic system or the spirits. And when I am working with them, she's the one that stands behind me. She's the one that grants me the spiritual authority I need to make those other entities listen to me. To this day, like if you purchase one of the candle offerings that I do for me, if you purchase from me one of the candle offerings I do, I don't just go to the altar and light a candle. I actually first go into my oratory and I pray to the highest, and I let God know what I'm doing, and I ask for my guardian angel to be with me. And then I tell my guardian angel that she needs to be with me, because when I speak, it needs to be her voice. When I see and hear, it needs to be through her eyes and ears. Because if that is the case, then I can only speak or see or hear truth. And once I've done that, I'll ask her, open the gates between here and the spiritual world. Bring to me, like, let's say I'm going to work with Raphael for you. She is the one. I ask her to bring Raphael to me. And then I'll leave the oratory and I'll go to Raphael's altar, and I have a ritual I use to open that altar, and I call him. So the ritual I do at that altar to call Raphael is backed up by, and even she's there performing the ritual with me. So they come not because of me. I'm just this little guy on the face of on the face of a ball of mud flinging through space. Why should they give a damn? But when she's there behind me, that's why they answer. That's why they know me. And so yeah, then I'll go, and then I go from there and I talk to them and do the candle offering. So yeah, they far from not wanting you to work with these other systems, they can actually be the driving force behind your not just understanding the system, because they'll teach you what it all means. You know, if you're doing a ritual, they're in your, you know, your guardian angel's in your ear saying, this means this, this means that. Hey, you need to change this. No, do this. Say that instead. And if you follow those instructions, your magic will just go right through the roof. I mean, you'll be astounded by the things you can accomplish, because it's not you, it's the guardian angel. So that's my long-winded answer to that one. And don't forget too, my guardian angel is the one that told me to go to the Golden Dawn. So, you know, because the Golden Dawn and that initiatory system was something she knew I needed. And she knew I needed to know Chick and Tabitha, and she knew that that's where my family was going to be. She knew that was going to be the basis that I stood on as an author. You know, I'm respected because Chick and Tabitha Cicero vouched for me, essentially. You know, I was nobody before them, but they introduce me to the world. They say, this is Aaron Leach, you know, listen to what he has to say, because we've been teaching him. So yeah, your guardian angel will lead you to other systems, or enhance the systems that you're already using, or however it is your true will is meant to be, whatever your path is meant to be, they're going to guide you on that. But you always go to her or him first and above all, and then let them guide you the rest.
Thank you very much.
No problem. By the way, who was it that came in? I let somebody in. Was it Brandon? Let's just say hi to Brandon. I don't know if you have any questions or anything that you brought that you'd like to talk about, but if so, do not hesitate to chime in. This isn't really a lecture session, even though I'm running off at the mouth a lot. But you guys are, and if you guys have thoughts, you know, on anything I'm saying, if you have your own experiences, do not hesitate to chime in as well. So I really do intend this to be a discussion between all of us on any subject you want to talk about. So have fun with it.
Okay, I'll go. So I don't have any question in particular, but I've just been like jotting down things that came to mind. So maybe I'll just mention like a few topics, and if any of them, like if you have something interesting to say about some of them, maybe you can just follow up from then.
Sounds great.
What I wrote down here was any comments on like Grant Morrison and his comics and Chaos Magick. Anything on? So I'm Jewish, and I've enjoyed. I started off with Donald Michael Craig's Modern Magic, which really related to me because he's Jewish and he speaks about a similar thing that I went through, where I was interested in the stuff, but there's all the symbolism, and it seems like mainstream Jewishness is kind of lost, like this magical aspect. So I was wondering also if you have any comments about. Obviously there are some well-known magic practitioners, Jewish magic practitioners, but maybe any comments about Israel and anything connected to Israel at the moment. So that's number 2. Number 3, I'm just giving you a choice. Number 3 is maybe any comments about any particular entheogens, which maybe either you've had personal experience with, or which you know of others. And I think I'll leave it at that. Those are your 3 choices. So it's Grant Morrison,
Wow.
Israel, and Entheogens. Just one of them you can pick.
Well, I mean, we can cover what you want to cover, no problem. Grant Morrison, I'm not the biggest. I don't know a lot about him. I mean, I'm a comic book fan, so I've definitely encountered his work. Wasn't he kind of into Thelema, or was it more Chaos Magic that he was into?
I actually haven't read. I was recommended it. And I didn't really get into the comic initially, but my friend was like, "No, you have to. It's all true, and it's you've got to read it." So I was wondering if you'd come in contact with those Invisibles. But I think he has done a lecture on Chaos Magick, but I don't know his whole story.
I see. Well, I mean, I do know a little bit about it because I mean, you can't be a comic fan and a magician without running into some of his stuff. But yeah, I think you're right. I think I've kind of thought of him as thelemic, but no, I can't think of anything that would be particularly thelemic with him. So I think it is more the chaos. But I also think, because when you say chaos magic, there's a couple of different things it can mean. There's the original chaos stuff, and then there's what you see today on the internet. And I am no fan at all of this modern chaos nonsense, this concept that, first of all, essentially that magic isn't real. And I'm sorry, but that's what Chaos Magick thinks, that magic isn't real. That there are no real protocols. There's nothing to actually learn. Just make it up as you go along. Whatever feels best for you, do it, and you're done. And I can't hang with that at all. Now, but when you go back to the original stuff, I'm forgetting some of the names of the authors. Was it Phil Hines? Oh, good Lord. I can't remember most of their names, but the guys who wrote the original books that became Chaos Magick. And these guys were not very far separated from like Robert Anton Wilson, Timothy Leary, Terrence McKenna. This is going to shock you guys, but this is where I kind of have some respect for chaos. God, I hate to go on record saying that, but one of the things that I think to get right is they were very, and this is why I kind of grouped Thelema into that as well. They were very, very big in the counterculture movement. All of this stuff we're talking about right now was all counterculture. And just like Robert Anton Wilson was, very big into teaching you how your brain works, how your mind works, and how your mind interfaces with reality. To me, that's what they got right. All of those guys, even the Chaos Magicians. And that had a big influence on me. Like I said, I recommended Robert Anton Wilson. I recommend Terence McKenna. I recommend all these guys because while I'm so many people know me as saying that magic is not a form of psychology, that psychology is not, I work on the spirit model, not the psychological model. But people often confuse that with me saying that there is no psychology in magic, and that's not true. Psychology is vastly important to magic. It's maybe as important to magic as an engine is to a car. My stance is simply that an engine is not a car. Okay? So, you really can't have a car without an engine, and you can't have magic without knowing thyself. If you don't understand what a reality tunnel is, if you don't understand how everything that you see, you interpret before you actually see it, whether you're hearing it, visually seeing it, feeling it with your body, it's all coming in through these filters, these reality filters. That's what they mean by reality tunnel. You have a very hard time seeing anything outside of that tunnel. Every piece of information you get, and God, this is true in politics. Just look at the politics around us right now. Every bit of information is interpreted so that it fits with the views they already hold. So everything proves them right, and nothing ever proves them wrong. And it's sad to say, but that's natural for the human brain. And to be an accomplished magician, you have to understand that, and you have to exercise your mind in such a way that you can break out of your reality tunnel, that you can put yourself into the tunnel of another person, that you can see how there might be more than one way to interpret information that's coming in through your senses. And all that early chaos stuff is what that's based on. Now, they are very psychological model of magic. When they'll say that when you're dealing with a spirit, you are really just accessing a part of your mind. The spirit is just an archetypal name and face that we put on these parts of ourselves. And you don't really make things manifest. You just change your viewpoint so that it seems like they manifest, And I don't really agree with that, but I also agree with it to a big extent because, okay, yes, I believe the spirits are real. They are objective. But they have to communicate with us through our minds. They don't have bodies that reflect light. They don't have vocal cords that vibrate sound. They communicate with us entirely through what we today would call telepathy. And a spirit of any kind, and by spirit I mean angel, God, demon, doesn't matter. A spirit cannot communicate anything to you that you do not have symbols in your brain to interpret. And we get this, people say, well, why can't the spirit just tell me this? I have this question, why can't they just answer it? Because you won't hear it. You don't have the ability to hear it. Your brain will reinterpret it to whatever your brain wants it to be. So you have to develop that elasticity, and you have to, in a very big way, magic is a language. When we learn the Hebrew terms for the tree of life, we talk about something being Gavoric. We talk about something being Tiferetic. That's, a normal person would not know what the hell you're talking about. But these words and these symbols, the sigils, the talismans, all of this stuff, these are all images that we pack into our mind in order for the spirits to be able to communicate with us, because they can't just do it in plain English and it make any sense to us. So, yeah, all of that, what Grant Morrison is into and all that stuff, don't turn away from it and don't think that it's all nonsense, because if you don't know your mind and how you process information, If you are a robot that is simply running on programs, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Short Circuit. It doesn't get happy. It doesn't get sad. It doesn't laugh at your jokes. It just runs programs. And that's true of most people. They just react. And as stimulus comes in, and they have been trained to react to that stimulus in a certain way, and off they go. There is no thought, no self-awareness. So you have to do what Robert Anton Wilson, Tim Leary, and I guarantee you Grant Morrison would call meta thinking. You have to be able to think about how you think. That's what makes us humans, by the way. Animals cannot think about their thinking. The only animals that we know can do that are the higher intelligence animals like whales and dolphins. Rats, by the way, I'm a big fan of rats. Rats can also think about their thinking. And you can also think about how you're thinking about your thinking. And you can think about how you're thinking about how you're thinking about how you're thinking. And this can just go on forever to any degree. And you have to be able to do that. And once you can do that, you become a meta programmer. You become a self-programming machine. So now you actually can get happy and sad. And you can laugh at jokes. And you have what the Gnostics would have called a soul. And that's what sets us apart from just the normal robotic person, is that we can actually stand outside of ourselves, question ourselves, doubt ourselves. Why am I reacting to this? Why am I feeling this way? What is the stimulus that is being presented to me that's causing this reaction in me? And if I don't like it, or if it's detrimental to me, how can I change it? So that's what the Chaos Magicians actually, I think, are getting right. Exploring the mind, being a psychonaut, as especially Terence McKenna would have called it. Exploring the realms of consciousness. And you know what? That can skip right into that third question you had about psychotropics and entheogens. I wrote the preface to Chris Bennett's Liber 420. Being a psychonaut, if that's the way you want to go, they definitely have a place in consciousness expansion. The caveat is you can't do it the way most people do, because then you're going to get hurt. But using them intelligently, knowing what they do, knowing what effects they can have, and then exploring those effects on yourself, that can be very, very important. When I was performing Abramelin, I think I was in the middle of performing it when I first ran across some of Chris Bennett's work. And he was explaining how there is evidence that the holy incense that was burned in the temple and in the tabernacle when it was Moses and Aaron and those guys was probably heavily made of cannabis. And the tent of meeting was a sealed tent. You know, you read in the Bible that the people in the encampment knew that Moses and Aaron were in the tent talking to Yahweh when there was a big pillar of smoke rising out of the tent. And that's because they were burning cannabis in there. So they were imbibing enough cannabis to, like, for it to be truly psychedelic, for it to be almost like an LSD trip. And they were seeing God, and they were hearing messages from angels. And when I saw that, I knew down to my core that was important. And from that point forward, I considered cannabis a very sacrament, a very sacred thing. So, and definitely know thyself.
I have a thought I'd like to share, if it's okay. A lot of people do use cannabis in their rituals, but there is an alternative I've found. Damiana, now you have to use a lot of it or put it in a water pipe, but it can also have a very similar visionary effect. It is legal. Well, I think they've legalized a lot of marijuana these days, but it can. And I've used it in my rituals as an alternative. And it can be very good. So just a thought that I wanted to share.
Damiana? I haven't heard of that one. That's new for me.
It's a Spanish thing, and I don't know the English for it. And I don't really speak Spanish. I'm an American, but I live in Texas, and I've lived here for a long time on and off. And I can't think of the English name of it, but Damiana it's a Mexican herb really that they use. Also,
Huh.
Jimson weed, Datura, that's another
That's a
hallucinogenic.
big one. Yeah.
If you've ever read yes, if you've ever read the Don Juan, the Carlos Castaneda books, they talk a lot about the different types of hallucinogenics that they use and experience. And those are also very interesting, but just a thought, I didn't want to take up a lot of time.
Okay. But yeah, well, one book that was very influential on me was called Psychedelic Shamanism. If you ever get that book, that's definitely worth reading. Another thing too, there was one, I didn't find it to be as useful as cannabis, but it's called Salvia divinorum, and I tried that one, and it definitely has an effect, but it's very limited compared to cannabis. It's kind of like you smoke it, and it's legal. I bought it online, and we're talking about the 1990s online. And you smoke it, and you get an immediate effect, and then it kind of goes away really quick. They say it's best if you use it in a completely dark and quiet room. So it's kind of a meditative thing. And they associate it with Mary. People actually can, they'll make teas out of it, and they'll drink the tea, and then they'll sit in a dark, quiet room meditating, and then they'll have visions of Mary. But one I want to mention too, and it's completely legal, but it's horrendously expensive. It's like way more expensive than gold ounce for ounce right now. And it's called lignum aloes. And if you ever do get into the grimoires, you'll see lignum aloes is mentioned in a lot of incense recipes. The Abramelin incense recipe is supposed to have lignum aloes in it. You can use other woods, but lignum aloes is the main recommendation. It makes it's the primary ingredient in the incense used in the Goetia. I mean, it's in the Key of Solomon. It's in Agrippa. I mean, lignum aloes is just all over that tradition. And the first time I ever got a hold of some of that and burned some in a censer, it made me feel stoned. And it's incredibly powerful. There is no question that it does have an effect on your psychological state. It opens you up. It allows you to see and with the spirit world, allows you to see and interact with the spirit world a lot easier. So yeah, there are different things that you can explore that are perfectly legal, even if they're expensive, even if they're not as efficient as cannabis. There's a lot of different avenues, but I would definitely say do it with education and do it with guidance of your guardian angel. And it's very important to exploring yourself and to breaking out of your patterns and breaking out of that robotic programming that all of our parents and teachers and preachers and television and novels and comic books and everything program into us. And it loosens that. What they would say in the East is it dilutes the poisons that society puts in us and allows you to start recovering from them. So I'm definitely a big fan of that kind of exploration. So that's where I stand on those. Definitely want you to be educated about it and safe about it, and don't do it, at a club with your best friends is probably not the best place to do it, but in a ritual setting, if you're going to use some of these higher powered psychedelics, I always suggest doing it. Make it part of a ritual, make it a sacrament, make it mean something, and put what you experience, put it under the authority of your guardians so that they can guide and lead you through it. Was there anybody else, or should Gaddy remind me what that second question was, and we can go on that one?
I was just wondering about I don't really know how to phrase the question, but a connection to like modern Israel, and I mean, is there any magic stuff happening in Israel? Because I lived in Israel, and my source for all this stuff was all outside of Israel. Like I found the Golden Dawn is all has a lot based on Jewish sources, and it was a non-Jewish organization that was actually getting me more connected with my own religion than what I could find in Israel itself. But that was just from my own experiences.
That's really hard for me to say, because most of what we get from Israel these days is all political, but that doesn't mean there's nothing going on inside Israel that you just don't hear about, you know. I do know that you're supposed to be 40 years old and a male before any of the rabbis will even discuss Qabalah with you. But I think, that's really the way, that's what you're going to want to explore. When you're talking about the Golden Dawn and anything that came later, they were all drawing from the Christian Qabalah for the most part. And today we call it the Hermetic Qabalah because it brings in all the Hermeticism too. And that goes back, the Christian Qabalah goes back to like Reuchlin, even John Dee. If you look at what Dee was doing with the Enochian system, he was attempting to create a Christian Qabalah. I mean, even like the practice of the Book of Logah with the 49 tables, that was basically based on the counting of the Omer practice, the 50 gates of wisdom. He just had 49 for his system rather than 50. So he was basically trying to create a Christian Qabalah. So all of this, what Dee was doing, what Reuchlin and all of those early Christian Kabbalists were doing, and all of that stuff, and then Hermeticism, and then finally we hit the Golden Dawn. From the Golden Dawn, we got Thelema, and even Wicca comes from Thelema and the Golden Dawn material. So that's all Hermetic Qabalah. It draws from the Jewish sources, but it's not really Jewish. It's all reinterpreted through a more Western lens. But for the Jewish stuff, I mean, I'm sure you probably already know this, but you want like the Sefer Yetzirah, you want to read the Book of Bahir, you want to look into the Merkava mysticism, the Hekkelot texts. That's all the real old Jewish mystical stuff. And I would be really surprised if there wasn't something going on in Israel toward those things, that the rabbis there probably do study that stuff, but they're so quiet about it. I remember in my real early days when I was just beginning, I did like you. I started with Don Craig's Modern Magic, and coming from a Christian background, and at the time, I pretty much considered myself a Christian magician, but it was all just kind of what I was coming up with on my own, if that makes sense. And then somebody handed me Modern Magic, and I opened it up, and the first thing I saw was the Kabbalistic cross, and I'm like, oh my God, it's the Lord's Prayer in its original Hebrew. This is amazing. So it just drew me right in. So I was very into studying the old, I studied everything I could of even the old Jewish Kabbalah as much as I could as a white boy studying on his own in the 90s, But I remember I even called up a rabbi. I just went to the phone book, looked up synagogues, and made a phone call. And that guy, he sounded like a pretty young guy, but he was so nice, and he seemed so excited that I was interested. And we talked about Judaism, and we talked about, in fact, I think you know what? Come to think of it, I called a rabbi because I had heard about Lilith. And Lilith became kind of one of my patrons through that period of my life. Kind of the way people are into Hecate today, I was into Lilith back then. And I went out and I bought a Torah because I thought that Lilith was in the Torah and she had just been deleted from the Christian version of the Old Testament. So I went and I bought a Torah and I brought it home and I started reading it, and I was like, okay, I'm going to see the story of Lilith, and she wasn't in there either. And I'm like, okay, what the hell? So that's why I called a rabbi, and I wanted to know who this Lilith person was, where I could find more info on it. So we talked about Lilith, and we talked about all this. But I do remember when I mentioned the word Qabalah, he kind of got quiet, and he goes, we don't really talk about that. And then he changed the subject, and we just went on talking about other stuff. So yeah, I think they're very guarded about it. But I think it's worth studying. I mean, I read the Zohar. And that was life-changing for me, because the Zohar, for those of you who don't know what the Zohar is, that is where the Kabbalah comes from. Kabbalah is not ancient Jewish mysticism. The ancient Jewish mysticism is the Merkava mysticism. And these were rabbis who would, by the way, they would use things like Amanita muscaria, the magic mushroom, and they would actually astrally travel. they didn't travel up the heavens. They would actually use meditation and prayer and fasting and things like that in order to generate a vision of God. So they would start at the highest point, and then they would turn around and they would kind of surf back down through the seven heavens, and they had to have passwords and talismans and all sorts of things in order to get by the gatekeeper angels on their way back to earth. And they would have all of these deep experiences of each of the heavens and what the angels there would teach them. And that's the ancient Jewish mystical practice. The Zohar came along in about the 1200s, and it came from Spain, where Jewish people, Christian people, Muslims, pagans, everybody gathered together in these big metropolitan areas in Spain. And the religious intolerance you usually associate with these kind of traditions just wasn't there for them. They were happy to talk to each other and share information. And it all kind of became this conglomerate, almost what happened in Egypt and Thebes, when you just had all these different traditions come together and a new tradition came out of it. Same thing in Spain in the 1200s. And what's his name? Moishe. I'm forgetting his last name, but there was one guy who wrote the Zohar, and this is the book of light, the Zohar. And what it actually is, it's almost like a rewriting of the Bible in a way. You have the Bible, which is the foundation, all the stories about Abraham, about Moses, about Isaac, about Jacob. But the Zohar is all those same stories, but he pointed out these deep mystical interpretations for all of it. You know, Abraham traveling across the Fertile Crescent from Ur to Palestine. This was actually the journey of the soul. You know, when Isaac was taken, not Isaac, who was it? Was it Jacob? Yeah, Jacob. When Jacob was taken into Egypt, this was the soul being born into the world. The world was Egypt. The Holy Land was heaven. So this was the descent of the soul into the physical realm. And getting back to the Holy Land was the purpose of the soul, to go back home again. So every story in the Bible is given, and the Qabalah teaches that the Bible has at least 4 interpretations based on the 4 worlds. And you probably remember reading this, Gaddy, in Modern Magic. He says this. There's the lowest interpretation is the literal interpretation. So anytime you meet a fundamentalist in any religion, whether it's Christian, Judaism, or Islam, the fundamentalists only believe in the lowest literal interpretation of the words of the sacred scripture. And then you have a higher, a symbolic interpretation that's associated with Yetzirah. And then you have a even higher religious, spiritual interpretation that's associated with Bria, and then a divine interpretation that's associated with Absolute, the highest world. So the Zohar was really about exploring these higher interpretations of the Bible. So I am so glad I read that, and that interpretation and that spiritual imagery. We were talking about this being a language you have to learn in order for angels to talk to you. I mean, absolutely recommend that. So yeah, so all of these, the Zohar, the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of the Bahir. I'm trying to think of some others that I encountered as well, that are these old Jewish texts that arose out of both Merkava and out of the Qabalah that came out of the 1200s. And they're beautiful, you know, and I'm sure I couldn't tell you where to look in Israel. But being a male, and if you're 40 years old or older, you should at least have a better inroad to bringing those subjects up with rabbis than you would in any other case. So that's really what you got to look for. But you can't ever go to them like, don't tell them you've been reading Modern Magic by Don Craig. Don't talk to them about spell casting. Don't talk, you know, most of the rabbis are going to be into what the Kabbalah calls Ma'aseh Bereshith, the work of creation. That is mystical interpretation of the scripture and how God created the universe and how the human soul is a reflection of God's created universe. And then there's Ma'aseh Merkava, the work of the chariot. And that's the practical stuff. That's making talismans. That's talking to angels. And commanding spirits, and that's the stuff that the rabbis, if you ask them about that, they'll show you the door. Even if they themselves are practicing it, they will show you the door, because that's supposed to be the taboo stuff that you don't talk about and you're technically not supposed to be doing. So I don't really know if that answered your question, but that's kind of been my experience and what I understand of those Jewish traditions. And it's got to be going on in Israel. I can't see how it couldn't be.
Thank you, Aaron. That was great. That was a lot more than I was expecting. So thank you very much. Again, very motivating and inspiring, and giving me some stuff.
Awesome. I get to rambling, and I never know if I'm actually answering the question. So I'm glad I did there. Good Lord, it's 1:30. I don't know how long you guys want to stay here. I know you guys got families and stuff that you probably want to do some stuff with, but I mean, I'm willing to stay here, as long as you guys want me to. So if you guys do have any other questions or anything you want to talk about, don't hesitate.
Could I just ask one last question about, you were just talking about your search for the story of Lilith as Adam's first wife. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I didn't ring a rabbi. That's obviously where I went wrong. But I went on a similar search, looking for that story, and I knew that it wasn't in the Torah. Where does it actually come from? Because the best that I could find was that it came from sort of Jewish folklore. Is that right? Or I know she's in the Mesopotamian stories, the Inanna stories, but.
Yeah, well, she's not in any of the Mesopotamian stories. She did not exist in Samaria or Babylon. That's a very common misconception. Lilith first appeared during the Hebrew captivity in Babylon. Now, in Mesopotamia, they had some spirits that may have been kind of the foundation for Lilith. They had what was called the Ardat Lili, and they were succubi. So Lilith was probably originally conceived as being one of the Ardat Lili. And they also had Lamashtu, was a big Babylonian demoness, and she was known especially for murdering babies in their cribs and for murdering women during childbirth. So that definitely had a big influence on Lilith. So she kind of arose during the captivity, and then of course, when the captivity was over and the Jewish people came back to the Holy Land, and that's kind of a misnomer. I mean, it's not like Nebuchadnezzar took every single person from Palestine over to Babylon with him, but the people who were held captive came back. The ones who were still in Palestine were still in the Holy Land, and still in Israel, or maybe I should say Judah and Israel. But anyway, in Palestine, they were called the Samaritans. You've heard of like the Good Samaritan in the Bible. The Samaritans were the Jewish people who never went into captivity. So you had the Jewish people who came back from the captivity, and they carried Lilith with them. Now, as far as the story of Lilith, she comes from the alphabet of Ben Sira. Syria. I may be totally demolishing that pronunciation, but it's the alphabet of Ben Sira, I believe. And that was a medieval text. And there is actually some question. We don't know if it was a serious Jewish text or if it was actually intended to be a parody. It might have actually been written to make fun of Jewish folklore. But one way or another, the story of Lilith being Adam's first wife, wanting to mate in the female superior position, but Adam wouldn't consent to it. And finally, the story goes, she basically stole, and some say she seduced the true name of God from Yahweh himself, and flew out, used it to fly out of the garden, and she took up residence in a cave, and she basically became Asmodeus's wife. In some cases it says Asmodeus, but I forget in the original if it was Asmodeus or if it was Beelzebub, but it was one of those two, king of demons. And she became his wife and populated the world with demons that way. And all of that comes out of that medieval story, and it caught on and became entrenched in Jewish folklore, and of course we still know that story today because of that. Have you ever read the essay I wrote called Lilith from Demoness to Dark Goddess?
No.
Okay, yeah, one of my earliest essays. In fact, I kind of credit it with being part of what got me to being a professional writer, because it got really popular. I wrote that essay right when Sarah McLachlan founded the Lilith Fair. So I published this essay, and people would go onto the internet, and they were looking up Lilith because of the Lilith Fair, and they were finding my essay. And so I got a lot of attention over that. And it is a very lengthy essay, and I explore it, every single thing I found about Lilith. I went all the way back to Samaria in that essay and traced her origins. Again, she isn't in Samaria or Babylon, but the basis for her legend are there. And I traced it all the way up to the modern use of Lilith in feminist circles and such, which is why Sarah McLachlan was calling her fair the Lilith Fair. So pretty much everything there is to know about Lilith, honestly, I put into that essay, and I think you would really enjoy reading it. If you go to Google and just put in my last name and the word Lilith, it's going to come up, or you can go to my old tripod page and find it there. But if you just search for my last name and the word Lilith, it's going to be like the first thing that comes up, and I think you'll really get a lot out of that.
Yeah, thank you for this, though. I've really appreciated it, and like somebody else said, it's just been really it's been inspiring, but kind of more reinvigorating somehow. So thanks for that.
That's awesome. I'm glad you guys feel that way. This is the first time I've done this, so I wasn't exactly sure how it would come out, but I've had a lot of fun, and I'm glad you guys have enjoyed listening to me ramble on and on.
I think there are also some questions in the chat.
Are there? Oh, hang on a second. You're right. There's not even any chat showing. Let me hit that button. Oh, you're right. There's 4 here. Oh, wow. I should have had that up the whole time. So Brandon, that's okay. I addressed Brandon before, and he didn't turn his mic on. He was in the chat. Sorry, Brandon. So Brandon says in Rufus Opus's 7 Spheres book, at the end he talks about making planetary talismans. I just one admission, I've not read his 7 Spheres book, so but basically invoking the archangel, angel, and holding each corresponding ingredient up one by one and asking for it to be consecrated and empowered, and then putting it into a bag. At one point within the text, he says you can do the same to living plants and animals. What are your thoughts on enchanting a cat as a planetary talisman? Honestly, I'd have to see the context that he's really giving that in. As far as to answer specifically from where he's coming from on that, I don't know if I would even have a reason to want to make an animal into a planetary talisman. But that's not to say that there aren't things like that, even in my own practice. Like, first of all, this house, as a temple, we call it the House of Bast. And we have a Bast altar here. Actually, it's being redone right now. So right now we don't. But we usually have an altar to Bast set up. And we consider all the cats here. We have 9 of them. And all of them are sacred to her. So they are literally sacred animals. So yeah, that is a thing. There's also a thing in the Key of Solomon, or at least some of the manuscripts, where when you're doing evocation work, you can have like a dog, for example. I guess you could have a cat, but it'd be a lot harder with a cat. But you can have a dog with you, and there is actually a ritual to consecrate the dog. And the reason for having the dog is because a lot of times the animals are going to be able to perceive the spirits before you can. So what they would do in the old days is they would have the dog, and they would be doing all of these chants and conjurations, and sometimes they would go on doing them just for hours and hours. And once the dog started barking or whimpering or whatever, they would see the dog start to behave funny, and they would know that the spirits had arrived because the animal was responding. And once the animal responded, then they could shift their ritual. Okay, now, even though we can't see and hear the spirits yet, we now know they're here, and they could shift the ritual into inviting the spirits to talk to them. So, yeah, there is a lot of precedent for involving animals in magical practice. Absolutely. Let me see. Oh, Moses de Leon. Thank you. Thank you, Billy. It was Moses de Leon. God, I was so brain farting on that one. Moses de Leon is the guy who wrote the Zohar, Sefer Zohar. Incredible piece of work. And he also gave Polly, he gave the link to my Lilith essay if you're wanting to look at that. So yeah, that's everything in the chat. And next time we do this, I'll have the chat open, so I'm not blind to everything you guys are trying to say in there and ask me. But yeah, I think that covers everything. So yeah, if no one has anything else, thank you very much for coming, and I've really enjoyed talking to you guys. And this is so nice because, you know, when I'm posting on Facebook, if I'm writing an essay, even a full book, it's always very focused. It's always just on what I want to say on a subject. And it's so nice to just have a little more free form like this, and you guys get to ask specific questions, and you definitely get a lot more of my personal experience, things I might not be willing to put into a book or an essay or post on Facebook. And that kind of thing, the personal anecdotes, is really important because this is a living tradition. It's not all just on paper, you know. It's something that really affected my life and changed my life in every way. And if you can't hear where I started from, and the steps I took to get here, and the experiences that I had, both good and bad, then what does it really mean, you know? And I think I think that might be why you guys feel a little more jazzed up, because it gives you a lot more of a sense that, hey, this is something that a person can do, and it has relevance in the real world. And I think that's very important. But folks, I want to wish you all a happy Halloween. And I want you to go out there and make offerings to your ancestors and thank them for your existence here. And be with your families. Stay safe. Don't go out. Only bring home candy. No COVID. And I think that's about it, folks. So I will let you all go. Oh, AJ says bye. Carrie says bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Not a problem, folks. I can't wait till the next time.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much.
Blessed be, folks.
Thank you.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Later, brother.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks.